This section heading is called Manage File Systems. So what we're going to do within this section is we're going to take a look at three key file systems that are managed by your Cisco IOS. Now, in order to understand them better, we're first going to explore the file systems through this Windows End Station over here. So your operating systems are managers of many things. One thing that they can manage is multiple file systems. When we open up File Explorer on this Windows End Station, we're going to see just that. So in Windows, we use a letter followed by a colon to signify a device that has been formatted with a file system. And when we look over here, we can see that we're managing two. We have our default drive, which is formatted in NTFS, and then we have an external USB drive, which is formatted in FAT32. Now if I click on that external USB drive, we're going to list the files within that file system in this GUI over here. However, if we wanted to list these inside of a command prompt, then we could use the dir command. So your dir command can be used to list files on a file system. Notice that when we open up this command line over here, we can see that the default file system that we're set up to manage is the one that's on the C drive. And then on the prompt over here, we can see our position within that file system. Now if I execute the dir command without specifying anything after it, it's going to list the files in the current working directory, which is this pcasa over here. However, if I wanted to list them on another file system, then I would just specify the device over here. And here we can see the same thing that we were actually seeing inside the GUI. So now your operating systems use file systems to keep track of files on a disk or a partition using a tree-like structure. Now if we wanted to explore this structure, then what we could do is we could use the tree command. And here we can see that structure. Notice in Windows we represent the root of the tree with the backslash, and then we can see everything else stems from it. So now we're going to discuss those three key file systems that are managed by our Cisco IOS. Now the reason we're only discussing three, when there's actually many more, is because this is going to give us a basic understanding of how our Cisco device actually works. Notice that we no longer have a single letter followed by a colon to represent a device that has been formatted with a file system. What we now have instead is a naming convention which is derived from the device type itself. So for example, over here, this is called flash because the file system is on flash memory. Over here, NVRAM, that's because the file system is on an NVRAM device type. Over here, system, that's because the file system is on system memory. Alright, so now starting over here, what's actually going to give us that basic understanding is not the file systems themselves, but the files that are within them. So for example, over here, inside the root directory of that file system, this is going to be the default location that your Cisco device is going to look to boot the operating system from. So down here you can see the operating system image file. So once the operating system loads, it is then going to look in this location over here for any persistent configuration to load during that boot process. Now this is a file, but I'd rather have you think of this as a container instead, because as we're going to see in a few moments, this you can't actually delete. You can only delete essentially the content within it. So now once your operating system loads and it looks for that startup configuration, if it doesn't find anything in this location right here, then what it's going to do is it's going to essentially load the default configuration that comes with the device. Now whether it loads the default or it gets it from here, where it's going to load it to is over here. Once again, we can consider this as a container. So this is going to be essentially the running configuration that's on the system, and when you think of this over here, I just want you to think of it in terms of RAM. So you have volatile memory, and then over here you have non-volatile memory. So now we're going to explore those file systems through our Cisco IOS. So if we execute the show file systems command, this is going to show us all the file systems that we're currently set up to manage. Once again, we're just going to cover those three that we just highlighted a moment ago. Now when looking at this type category over here, the one that may not be clear to you is this opaque. So this opaque simply means that we're using a pseudo file system on this device. So now the way that we're going to explore those files on those file systems once again is by using the dir command. Now if I execute the dir command, it's not only going to show me the default device that we're currently set up to manage through here, but it's also going to show me my working directory on the file system on that device. Now once again, this is the default location to where your Cisco device is going to look to load the operating system image from. So now if we wanted to actually see the file system type that's on that device, then we can run a file system check. And here we can see that we're using the FAT file system on there. Alright, so now we're going to explore the other two devices, and again we're going to look for those containers. So first that's NVRAM, and then inside of there we can see our container called startup config. Now once again we're calling this a container even though it's a file, because when we try to delete this, as we're going to see in a moment, we don't actually delete it. What we delete is the content within it. Now what's currently in there is 1760 bytes of persistent configuration. So this is going to be the default location to where your device is going to load any persistent configuration from. So now if I try to delete it, now right here when it gives you this is something that you need to get kind of used to. So it says delete file name and then it's giving you the file name. It's not actually looking for you to give a response like Y or yes. What it really wants you to do is just press enter. If you do enter Y or yes here, it's going to look to delete the file name Y or yes. So I'll press enter and enter. Now it's going to give us an OK, like an indication that, yep, it successfully deleted the file. However, if we list that again, we're going to see that we didn't actually delete it. What we did is we deleted the content within it. Now anytime you see a 5 or a 0 over here, this simply means that there's no persistent configuration within it, and then if we reboot the device, that it's going to load the factory default configuration that comes with it. So now if we explore that other container, which resides inside of the system device, or shall I say the file system on the system device, we can see the container running config. And here we can see the number of bytes matched what was in the startup config. Now anytime you make changes to this system, you're going to see the number of bytes either increment or decrement depending on what you're doing. So this is where your running changes are going to be made to the system, and then if you want them to persist, you're going to have to save them back to here. So now the way that you can save this, and I'll do the full command first, so this is going to make sense. We're going to copy the running config to the startup config, and then just press enter. And now I'm going to execute a single command so that we can verify both of those again, and I'm going to say all file systems, and then we'll do a comparison. So here we can see inside of the system device that we can see the running config, we can see the number of bytes, and then we just executed a save. So where we saved it to in order to have this configuration persist through a reboot is to over here, and here we can see the number of bytes matches exactly. So now I just want to show you two other ways that you can actually save it. Once again, we can execute the commands at their shortest form. So if I kind of run through this, we can see that copy is going to be unique, COP, and then if we take a look at the running config, we can see that RU, and then the startup config, we can see that it's ST. Now you could execute that, but what you're going to see a more common way to kind of memorize this is just to do this, just to say copy, run, and then start. Okay, and this is the same thing. Now, when you're executing this command is useful in understanding how the whole process works, but what you can do as an alternative to this is you could just execute write, which is essentially writing the running config to the startup config. It's a much shorter way of doing it. Now, when you look at your Cisco exams, they're going to want you to know this way, and it makes sense because this helps you to understand how that whole process works.